there's hope, but we have to scale back our expectations or suppress them right now, Judge. It's very iffy.
Before we finish, and I appreciate you staying with us for so long, Colonel, you mentioned Germany. Is Germany going to leave NATO and the EU in order to become independent again?
It will have to. It doesn't have any choice. The globalists are a legacy of the Second World War. Remember the famous statement, everybody used to chuckle over it, NATO exists to keep the Russians out and the Germans down. You know, in the 1990s, when I would hear that crap, I was furious because here the Germans were probably the single most reliable and loyal component of the NATO alliance. And people continue to recite that insulting nonsense. I think the Germans have had it. When this government goes, whatever government replaces them will be a nationalist government, and that will continue. It may be that you get the AfD, but they're not the final answer. You're going to see a succession of governments in all of these countries, all of which are going to be nationalist. And when I say nationalist, they're all going to be France first, Britain first, Germany first. In fact, in Germany, the Germans may go one step further and the population may say, how about Germany only? Because the Germans are sick to death of being treated as a cash cow. You know, you go to Italy or you go to France and they blame everything that's wrong on the Germans. It's absurd. It's nonsense. But the Germans have been the cash cow. You know, the Germans have walked into the room full of other Europeans and they walk in with their heads down and bowed and very solemn. We know we're Germans. We know we're bad. We've done terrible things. How much money do you want? I mean, that's what it amounts to. You know, I mean, the Austrians have escaped a lot of this, you know, because the Austrians are famous for having convinced the world that Beethoven was Austrian and Hitler was German. In fact, the opposite is
the opposite is true.
But they've escaped all that, you know. So, we are the nice Austrians. We never did bad things. Well, that's a lot of crap. But let me tell you, if I want to go back over it, because I spent my life studying that, 40% of all your concentration camp commanders were Austrians, a disproportionately large number compared with what should have been the case. You start looking at all the SS formations and the names, and they're all South German and Austrian names. I mean, we could go on and on and on. My point, you know, I'm not saying the Austrians ought to be whipped and punished today either. That's all over with. That's nonsense that needs to go away. But I think that we have done this to the Germans for so long that they've lived in kind of a Stockholm syndrome, you know, where they enjoy having the whip hand held over their heads, and they have willingly pled guilty to every charge. I think that's over. The younger generation wants nothing to do with it. And they're tired of being exploited for the European Union. They have been effectively deindustrialized with plunging the country into near poverty because of the European Union. They're looking at NATO and they're saying, how is NATO providing for our security? You know, back when there was a Soviet Union, it was arguable, but today, no. What have we done? Remember, NATO is either out of area or out of business. In other words, either NATO gets dragged into our imperial adventures or we don't need it. Well, the Germans have never wanted to be involved in any of the imperial adventures that we were part of. And they have scrupulously avoided most of them. And when they've gotten involved, as they did, for instance, in Afghanistan, they spent most of their time inside the wire in their little sort of garrison. And the best thing about Afghanistan for the Germans was all the great beer that was shipped in from Germany. They ran over to the German compound to drink beer. The point is, it's over. Germany will leave NATO. Germany will leave the EU. And when it does that, it will not only regain its former position in Europe, it will restore its relations with Russia.
Right.
Over the last 400 years, with the exception of 2 world wars that could have been avoided and should have been avoided, were very good. And we have always looked at any potential reconciliation or rapprochement between Germany and Russia as dangerous to us. It's not. It's not dangerous to us at all. What it does, though, in Europe is it diminishes France. It diminishes Britain. They become largely irrelevant strategically. because that axis between Germany and Russia economically is huge and very, very powerful. And it's something the Russians would like to see restored. But right now, they don't think it's possible. And so they've turned all of their attention to Eurasia. All you have to do is listen to this man, Alexander Dugin, and others. They talk about Russia's future in Eurasia. But that's misleading because Russia has real interests in Europe, and those interests are largely with Germany.
And can I add a footnote? These dramatic changes, which would be for the betterment of everybody in Germany, will probably not happen under Chancellor Merz.
No. He has to be retired quickly from active duty on a permanent basis.
Right.
And he's had his run. He's we go back to when Kohl departed as Chancellor of Germany. Then you ended up with Schlesinger. He understood, these dynamics very well. He's succeeded by Merkel, who did understand them, but was never willing to stand up and defend them. Merkel was the one that stood up in Munich after during Trump's first term and said, we can no longer depend on the United States. Europe must find its own way forward. Shortly thereafter, you had Macron talk about NATO as being brain dead. But what happened? Nothing. In other words, the Europeans went back to sitting on their rear ends and doing nothing, and the Germans were equally complacent. Those days are over. Everyone is going to have to get up in their corner and get to work because Germany is in a lot of trouble economically and socially. All these countries are overrun with people from North Africa and the Middle East that they never asked for and don't want. They're dealing with incredible criminality that they're unaccustomed to. I mean, Germany used to be probably one of the safest countries in the world, as was Sweden, as was Norway and Denmark. All of a sudden, that's gone. That's not the case anymore. The Germans don't like it, but they're afraid to do anything about it because they're part of this European community where they are constantly told they're bad. They're bad. Germans are bad. Germans are Nazis and so forth. They've had it. It's like everything else. Eventually, people do wake up and react. And they're tired of being humiliated. So Merz, I think, is somebody who's going to culminate and go away. And then all bets are off. It'll take Germany time to do all of these things, but it's not hard to see the handwriting on the wall. And we should welcome this. We should say, look, it's time for you to be on your own, and we want to help you. The biggest mistake we can make is to insist, no, we want you to remain our vassal state. That would be catastrophic, and we need to not do that.